Beach bums by day, felons by night. Two surfers get in over their heads when they steal the most famous star sapphire in the world. On a warm summer evening in 1964, actress Ava Gabor and her husband Richard Brown were returning to their hotel in New York City when they ran into some trouble.
No, I think they're new to the area. Photo right there.
Brown unmasked one of the robbers, but after a brief glimpse of the man's face, found himself staring down the barrel of a gun. The couple did as they were told, and the thieves made off with a staggering $50,000 in jewels.
Do you recognize anybody in here?
The NYPD asked the couple to go through some mugshots. None of the faces looked familiar, and for good reason. The assailants were not from New York. They were from Miami, Florida. In appearance, Alan Kuhn and his friend, Jack Murphy, aka Murph the Surf, were professional beach bums. They spent most of their time surfing and worked part-time jobs as cabana boys. But their lifestyle suggested another source of income. 26-year-old Kuhn had recently paid cash for a new Cadillac convertible. He also owned a yacht and an upscale condominium on Biscayne Bay. He and his 27-year-old partner Murphy had a reputation for being con men, using their charm and good looks to take advantage of wealthy female tourists. The authorities suspected the two playboys were involved in several crimes, but lacked the evidence needed to arrest them. Miami police kept the men under surveillance, waiting for them to slip up.
They were a different brand of wild and crazy guy. They liked the wild lifestyle that they lived, and I think being thieves and engaging in these daring crimes was part of their own kind of mystique about themselves.
In October, they returned to New York in search of another score. Their first stop was the Cambridge Hotel, where they joined their friend and crime partner, Roger Clark.
Trip okay?
Come on in. I'll be right in.
Clark was a fellow beach bum who had left Miami weeks earlier. He had rented a 3-bedroom suite at the Cambridge to serve as their base of operations.
Your name? Josh. Thanks.
The men hit the town every night, and after making the scene at all the hot spots, the party continued back at the hotel. But their days were spent enjoying more cultural pursuits, such as strolling through the American Museum of Natural History. They were typical tourists, except in one regard. They returned to the museum day after day, always to the 4th floor and the J.P. Morgan Hall of Gems and Minerals, home to one of the most spectacular collections of gemstones in existence. The centerpiece of the exhibit was the fabulous Star of India.
It weighs over 500 carats. It has a very, very fine star, and it's monstrous in the world of phenomenal gemstones. Something over 500 carats is extraordinarily large.
Security in the gem hall seemed surprisingly lax. Neither the display cases nor the windows showed any sign of being connected to an alarm. The men also visited areas of the museum most patrons never saw, such as the 5th floor offices of the museum's staff. Kuhn studied the museum's layout. He read up on the gem collection from a book he acquired from the gift shop. While the all-night parties continued in their suite, he formulated his plan. On the evening of October 29th, 1964, Kuhn, Murphy, and Clark put the plan into action. Taking care to avoid the museum's small force of security guards, they broke into a side door. They made their way to the 5th floor and entered one of the offices. They were directly above the Hall of Gems. Although the interior entrance to the Hall of Gems was secured by a locked iron gate, the windows were left open a few inches for ventilation. Getting in was no problem. The burglary was going as planned. The men were safely inside, and no alarms had sounded. Outside, Clark kept an anxious watch, while Kuhn and Murphy prepared to make the greatest score of their lives. Only a thin pane of glass stood between the thieves and their prize.
Murphy got it.
When Kuhn lifted up the Star of India's Sapphire, he saw it was resting on an alarm sensor. They resorted to Plan B. Hours had passed, and Roger Clark feared his friends had been caught. Just as he was about to give up on them, the thieves appeared. They quickly made their getaway. No one responded to the alarm. The next morning, Kuhn and Murphy headed to JFK International Airport and took an early flight to Miami. So did Kuhn's new girlfriend, 19-year-old Janet Flakowitz, but she was traveling alone. Kuhn had told her to pretend not to know him and had given her a briefcase with strict instructions not to look inside. Roger Clark also left the city, bound for his parents' house in Connecticut.
Hello, Mr. Clark. Hey.
Before the burglary was discovered, the thieves were long gone. Later that morning, a custodian was opening the fourth-floor galleries when his routine was broken. The authorities descended on the museum, with the press only moments behind. Detectives combed the hall for physical evidence, but thousands of visitors passed through the museum each day, and any fingerprints they found would be of little use. 24 gems were missing, including 3 irreplaceable jewels: the DeLong ruby, the Midnight Star sapphire, and the Star of India. The enormity of the theft was shocking, as was the ease with which it had been accomplished. The curator had personally armed the security system the night before, and the removal of the star should have tripped it.
As we visited the scene after the commission of the burglary, of course the first thing we asked was about the alarm system. And I took a look at the wires and touched them, and the wires came away in my hands as dust.
It was clear to Assistant DA Maurice Nadjari that the security system hadn't been maintained for years.
Now, all they had to do was break the glass, and they had it. And they were gone, without a trace.
By afternoon, the sensational robbery had made national news.
Let's look at national headlines. The top story in Tri-State News: the burglary of New York's American Museum of Natural History. More than 20 gems were taken by the thief or thieves. New York City police have no suspects and no leads at this time. In Brooklyn last night, an apartment fire caused extensive damage in the Flatbush neighborhood. And the Yankees wrapped up their homestand last night with an 8-4 loss.
Back on their home turf in Miami, Kuhn and Murphy took part of their haul to one of their usual receivers. The small, unrecognizable stones could be easily fenced, but the Star of India would be much more difficult.
This was a famous gemstone, and more famous because it was in the museum's collection, and certainly was not easy to simply offer for sale on the open market. Who would have bought such a thing?
Later that afternoon, in New York, police got their first real lead.
An informer spoke to a vice cop, and the informer said, "You know, I read about the museum burglary, and I don't know whether the information I have will be of any value to you, but I went to a party last night, and I heard them talking about Miami, New York, a big heist. When I walked into the bedroom, I saw a blueprint of the American Museum of Natural History."
Little did the officer know that his $2 thank you to the bellhop would crack open a multi-million-dollar case. The room was registered to Alan Kuhn, Jack Murphy, and Roger Clark. Running a check on the names, authorities discovered their criminal pasts and obtained a search warrant.
You check those out, I think.
Inside the hotel room, detectives found plenty of evidence that they had the right men, including glass cutters, a crowbar, and other burglary tools. There was broken glass embedded in the sole of a shoe. They also found the gem book on the Morgan collection with a museum brochure and snapshots tucked between the pages. The men hadn't cleaned up, and they hadn't checked out, so the detectives settled in and waited. When Roger Clark returned later that evening, he walked right into their trap.
They immediately placed Clark under arrest. After some persuasion, Clark finally told the entire story of what happened.
One day after the robbery, the first suspect was in custody. But there was no sign of the jewels. Back at the condo on Biscayne Bay, Murph the Surf and Alan Kuhn were laying low when they had some unexpected visitors.
Who's that?
The FBI, acting in cooperation with the New York police, arrested Kuhn and Murphy in Miami, 2 days after the theft of the Star of India.
Let's go. Back up. Back up. It's all right, girls. Don't move.
The men were extradited back to New York to face charges. But the jewels were still nowhere to be found.
So, Murphy, what brought you into New York City?
Here these guys came up from Florida. They were arraigned. They looked like each of them had $1 million in the bank. They were high style, well tanned, good looking, well spoken, and nothing in the world was going to break these guys. By this time, Clark had recanted. So really, we had a rather weak case.
Kuhn and Murphy flatly denied any involvement in the crime. Without Clark's testimony to contradict them, Assistant DA Najari needed another angle.
So you're telling me
He went after the courier, Janet Flakowitz.
this heist that he's planning, the biggest heist this country.
At first, she claimed ignorance. But under intense interrogation, the 19-year-old broke down and admitted she'd peeked into the briefcase.
They're not. They're evil people. They've got criminal records.
She told me the entire story, that she had seen it, seen the gems, she knew they were the gems from the museum, and implicated the defendants very, very well.
Najari took the case into the judge and requested high bail.
We argued and argued and argued that these men would fly, that they were a danger to the community, nothing would cut any ice. Low bail, $2,500.
Kuhn, Murphy, and Clark easily made bail and were released. Then came another blow, as Flakowitz, claiming she'd been bullied by her interrogators, went back on her story. Najari's case was falling apart. Upon their release, the press treated the three criminals like celebrities. They reveled in the attention and continued to proclaim their innocence. Najari decided to try a new approach.
My feeling was that these free spirits would never break. And probably I didn't stand much of a chance on trial. They would never break unless I could zap them of their freedom. And I went through all of the violent robbery files. And I came up with two that seemed to follow the pattern and seemed to fit the description of these three guys. One of them was the robbery of Eva Gabor, the actress.
Najari brought Eva Gabor to New York City, and she positively identified her assailants as Jack Murphy and Alan Kuhn. The men were arrested again, and this time the bail was set at $250,000 apiece, a sum impossible for the thieves to raise. Faced with the prospect of hard time on Rikers Island, Kuhn decided to cut a deal. In return for a 1-year sentence for each of them, he would help recover the jewels. but the judge refused to release Kuhn without bail. Najari took matters into his own hands before the star was lost forever.
He had promised us that he would get the gems overnight. Take me to Florida tonight, I'll get the gems for you tonight, we'll be back in New York tomorrow. And so I told the detectives that we're going to kidnap the guy.
In the custody of Assistant DA Najari and New York Detective Richard Malim, Kuhn flew south to make good on his promise.
Hey, it's Alan.
Upon their arrival, Kuhn was recognized, and news spread that he was back in Miami. Reporters soon began to gather outside their hotel.
Hey, it's Kuhn.
With all of the media attention, none of Kuhn's contacts were willing to talk to him. Recovering the gems overnight would be impossible. Najari had some explaining to do.
I called the district attorney, Frank Hogan, my boss, told him what I had done, thinking I'd better cover myself somehow. He said, well, Maury, I'll tell you what. If you recover the gems, come back. If you don't, go south to Argentina. I don't want to see you because I won't defend you for kidnapping. So find them or never come back to New York.
Kuhn enjoyed all the commotion, making the most of the attention while it lasted. He knew the moment he found the jewels, he'd have to trade the Miami sunshine for a New York City jail cell. To Kuhn's delight and Najari's chagrin, the quest for the gems was front-page news. Najari kept the pressure on, threatening to return Kuhn to prison with or without the gems. Recovering them was the jewel thief's only chance for a deal.
Kuhn kept making phone calls. We kept changing motels because we kept getting spotted by people. We must have been in 4 or 5 different motels.
After 4 days, a retired Miami jeweler named Hy Gordon came forward and agreed to act as a go-between. Following instructions from an anonymous source, Gordon and Detective Malim drove to an all-night coffee shop. Once there, they were to wait inside for half an hour, leaving their car unlocked. When they returned to the car, a note and a key were waiting for them. The note led Detective Malim to the Miami bus terminal. If the jeweler's tip paid off, he'd find $500,000 in jewels stashed in a 25-cent locker. There, along with 8 other gems, including the Midnight Star, the detective recovered the Star of India.
The Assistant District Attorney Najari, my office, went to Florida, and they have been engaged in an effort to recover jewels stolen on October 29th from the American Museum of Natural History. They returned this morning with 9 of the 24 jewels that have been stolen.
We did not recover the DeLong ruby. That was not amongst them. There was a second receiver who was holding on to that. We didn't get it. And I told Kuhn that we had recovered 9 gems, not 24, that there was no deal.
Because Kuhn was unable to hold up his end of the bargain, he, Clark, and Murph the Surf were each sentenced to 3 years on Rikers Island. The Star of India's Sapphire was put back on display in the museum under much tighter security. The DeLong Star Ruby and 5 other stones were recovered a year later without the help of the thieves. 9 of the gems from the collection were never recovered.